Canada's going to get tougher if the US trade deal isn't reached before the deadline. So if Mark Carney thinks that we actually buy that he's going to do anything, we don't. Canada discussing trade concessions with the US to avoid new tariffs, says source. Called it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been following our coverage on the trade negotiations and Mark Carney's stance, then you're pretty up to date. Remember when I said this yesterday? Canada's going to get tougher if the US trade deal isn't reached before the deadline. And it's kind of amazing because we put a video yesterday that actually went through all of Carney's capitulations last year, leading up to him essentially getting on his knees before Donald Trump. And I think it's crazy that this story and this statement came out the day after. So Mark Carney is threatening. He's threatening to get tough on Donald Trump. So I just want to remind people of what he said last year. Ladies and gentlemen, this is back in June 27th of 2025. And it says, Canada steel producers tell government its tariff protection measures aren't enough. And in this article, Carney says this: Prime Minister Mark Carney has threatened to increase counter tariffs on US-produced steel and aluminum if Canada does not reach a broader trade deal with Trump by July 21st. Not even a month later, Canada cancels these threats, even as Trump continues to escalate. So if Mark Carney thinks that we actually buy that he's going to do anything, we don't. Well, let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, as if by clockwork, and this is in record time because it took Mark Carney about 2 weeks to actually go back on his threats that he was talking about before. It took him less than 24 hours this time. Well, I guess 48 hours, I should say. Less than 48 hours. Canada discussing trade concessions with the US to avoid new tariffs, says source. Wow, Mark Carney is sure getting tough on Donald Trump, isn't he? What are these concessions? Well, here they are. Canada and the US are discussing a prospective deal in which Ottawa would tackle a list of Trump administration trade demands in exchange for Washington scrapping a threat to impose new tariffs, a source familiar with the talks said on Friday. Trump slapped tariffs on a range of Canadian imports after returning to power last year, and in July unveiled 50% tariffs on a wide range of imports to take effect on August 19th unless Ottawa tackled U.S. grievances. As part of the proposed deal, Canada would remove tariffs on U.S. autos, reach agreements on the U.S. interpretation of how dairy quotas should be allocated, and seek the return of American alcohol to store shelves in major Canadian provinces. Remember when EB said that there wasn't a chance in hell that that's happening? I wonder if he's talked to Doug Ford about this as well, because they weren't, both of them were not in favor of actually doing that, but here we are. In exchange, the U.S. side would reduce existing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, said the source, who requested anonymity because of the extreme sensitivity of the situation. There is no guarantee the two sides will reach a deal, said the source. One challenge for Ottawa is that it cannot order American alcohol back to the shelves, since the matter is the responsibility of the provinces. Wait a minute. Remember when Mark Carney sat with all of the premiers and he literally said that we are united in the direction in which we're taking here?
We are united in direction and objective and purpose and seriousness about the response. The core here is that you have a united front of first ministers. We're all working in the same direction for Canadians.
Yet, he and his team are talking with the Trump administration and saying, oh, well, maybe we can put alcohol back on the shelves, despite EB and Ford being really against that. And this is also on the heels of the second breakup of Mark Carney and Doug Ford. It's almost like an abusive relationship, where Doug Ford and his MPPs, or MLAs, depending on your vernacular, they were supposed to completely back the Alto train. And in return, Mark Carney was supposed to back and support the expansion of Billy Bishop Airport to include commuter planes. Well, Mark Carney has since backtracked on that and basically given Doug Ford the proverbial finger. And Doug Ford, understandably, is not happy about that because Mark Carney went back on a deal. Sounds very Trumpian to me, doesn't it? Just putting that out there because a lot of comparisons are made between the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, being Trumpian, despite the fact that he's not. Meanwhile, the guy that's the most Trumpian in Canada seems to be Mr. Carney himself. But hey, what do I know? Anyhow, this is what we kind of have here. So how is Mark Carney going to get this done? He's already put a rift between himself and Ford. He's put a rift between himself and EB over the pipeline. So if the U.S. wants the alcohol back on the shelves, how are you going to convince them to do that when he doesn't have the authority to? Sounds like someone who can't unite the country to me. But hey, what do I know? Canada told the United States that unless the two sides reached a deal to stave off the tariffs, Ottawa's ability to continue talking would be constrained by public anger and potential further retaliation by the provinces, said the source. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make this crystal clear what this is saying. A couple days ago, Mark Carney says he's going to get tough on Trump if they can't come to a deal. Meanwhile, in closed talks, he's saying, oh, like, if we don't get a deal, the public's going to be angry. And the provinces, I don't know what I'm going to be able to do because I don't have jurisdiction over them. Notice what isn't said. What isn't said is, feel the wrath of the federal government of Canada if you actually don't get a deal done, like he was trying to say in the media. This is crazy. It's not surprising, but it's crazy that we're actually seeing this reported. Go Reuters. So far, Reuters is soon becoming my actual favorite news source that is in the mainstream media. They're actually doing a favorable job of reporting what's going on with no spin. Any side agreements to deal with the potential new tariffs would be part of a larger review of the tripartite United States-Mexico-Canada Trade Pact, which was due to have been completed but now looks to drag into next year. The Office of Canadian Federal Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who is in charge of U.S.-Canada relations, declined to comment. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer also declined to comment. Now, I just want to go back to something else that Mark Carney said this week and remind people of the fact that he is flip-flopping within a matter of days. Carney not interested in narrow U.S. trade deal. Prime Minister Mark Carney says he is quote-unquote not interested in making a narrow deal that does not address all of President Trump's major tariffs on Canada, drawing a line in the sand as trade negotiations heat up. Speaking at an aluminum plant in Saguenay, Quebec, Thursday, Mr. Carney said he hoped there would be quote-unquote pathways to a wide-ranging agreement before Mr. Trump's latest threatened tariffs take effect. So immediately after he says this, I'm not interested in a narrow deal. I'm drawing a line in the sand. Well, the line seems to have actually been drawn in sand and promptly wiped away, because not even 48 hours later, this story comes out where they're actually, they're looking at a narrow agreement, specifically on the 232 tariffs. So for the Canadians who haven't been paying attention and maybe are now, are you getting it yet? The mainstream media is not correct in its portrayal of Mark Carney en masse when they're trying to position him as this genius, honest banker, this economist that was going to take Donald Trump, wrestle him to the ground, and Canada would stand victorious. This is not what's going on. This is a man who has demonstrated now, in a matter of a couple of weeks, never mind the past history since he's been prime minister, just in the last couple of weeks, he has a propensity to not tell the truth, to outright lie to Canadians, and to be anything but transparent. He says one thing to the media and says the absolute opposite, and his government does the opposite behind closed doors. This is what is going on with our strong prime minister and elbows up. Now, the Globe and Mail put out this opinion piece, and this is interesting. Concession Carney faces his Neville Chamberlain moment. Now, this was done by Fen Osler-Hampson. Now, who is Fen Osler-Hampson? Fen Osler-Hampson is the Chancellor's Professor at Carleton University and co-chair of the expert group on Canada-U.S. relations. So, obviously somebody who sounds like they know what they're talking about. As U.S. President Donald Trump's August 19 deadline approaches, Prime Minister Mark Carney is making concessions to keep looming tariffs at bay. This could prove to be a defining moment in deciding the fate of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, for the choices are stark: appease or defiance, with little room to maneuver in between. The devil's in the details and the haggling over tariffs, rates, and quotas. But there can be little doubt that Canada is going to have to concede a lot before the president and his tariff-hungry team are mollified. Dominic LeBlanc, the minister responsible for Canada-US trade, has tried to reassure Canadians that his latest round of talks with the US counterpart, Jameson Greer, were quote-unquote constructive and detailed. Mr. Trump's spin was characteristically more pointed, ad hominem, and possibly closer to the mark. He described the talks as quote-unquote nasty and Canada's leadership as nasty. It is clear what the Americans want from us. Major concessions on all irritants and a stand down on retaliation, plus the rollback of Canada's digital content and platform regulations, etc. And they want Canada to make those concessions now before turning to broader questions about the USMCA's future and the degree to which it will be governed by the US new tariff regime. But Canada's problem is not just that Mr. Trump's idea of negotiation is to ask for the moon and give little upfront in return. Mr. Trump also thinks the Prime Minister is weak and can be rolled over just like the Europeans, British, and Japanese in their negotiations with Americans. Mr. Carney hasn't helped himself either by capitulating to Mr. Trump on the digital services tax last year and more recently on sharing toll revenues from the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Neither has he done so with his "I said it, but I didn't really mean it" apology delivered in a private phone call to U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent after his blistering global quote-unquote rupture speech at Davos. Mr. Carney's trade diversification strategy aimed at doubling Canada's non-U.S. trade by 2035 will take many years to bear fruit. Too much is at risk when 3/4 of Canada's trade is dependent on a single market. Accordingly, like Mr. Chamberlain, as some revisionist historians have argued, it appears Mr. Carney believes his best hope is to avoid a doomed trade war with an erratic leader. Instead, Mr. Carney pursues an accommodationist course long enough for Canada to diversify its economic relationships, much as Mr. Chamberlain bought time for Britain's rearmament. If an agreement is reached before the August 19th deadline, or if talks are sufficiently productive that Mr. Trump extends it to allow more time to reach a deal, Canada will avoid a stay of tariff execution. However, Mr. Carney's political challenge will not end there. He will have to defend his concessions, likely many of them, to a Canadian public that believes he should be going quote-unquote elbows up with Mr. Trump. Called it. And I'm not the only one. I'm not some prophet here. All of you have called this as well. So, Carney is in a no-win scenario. He is in a position where he has now made it so he has to give even more concessions to Donald Trump, because this is not surprising. He has made it his mission to poke Donald Trump in the eye however he can. Now, a lot of people will say, well, Donald Trump does the same thing. Yes, he does. Who has the larger economy? Who can afford to poke the other person in the eye? I don't like that Donald Trump keeps poking us in the eye, but I accept the reality that he can. And Mark Carney told Canadians that we're going to stand up. And all the Liberal parties told him that we're going to stand up and we're going to resist. So he convinced all his voters that we will resist. Is it not surprising right now that a recent poll shows that 70% of Canadians want to push back? Well, just because a poll shows one thing doesn't mean that's the wise thing to do. So Mark Carney, what he has to do now is he has to concede. He's conceded all this time. He has telegraphed to Donald Trump that he will concede if enough pressure is applied, and that Donald Trump will get what he wants. So now he has to concede. Well, now what? Whoever was in that meeting and told Trump that, people are going to be really angry, they were right. And now you have a professional that actually studies this stuff calling it in black and white. And they're saying, Carney put himself in this position. And he shouldn't have done that. Imagine where we'd be if we didn't try and implement a digital sales tax. If we didn't try and, say that we're going to be taking hundreds of millions of more dollars from American streamers during a trade negotiation. Imagine if we'd actually, I don't know, bargained in good faith. Imagine if we did that. Imagine if he didn't go to Davos and, basically tell everybody that the U.S. is a dangerous hegemon that shouldn't be trusted immediately after going to a actual dangerous hegemon and signing a trade deal as a strategic partner. Imagine that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I present you this. Mr. Carney has said that he was going to handle Donald Trump. He said that he knew how Donald Trump negotiated. He bragged about the fact that Mr. Trump has come for Canada. He wants to own us. He wants to break us. But I have negotiated many deals in the past. I've managed economies in the past. You have not managed economies in the past. You've managed interest rates in the past. Give me a break. The people who have managed economies are the actual governments in charge of the economy. Otherwise, why do we have a Minister of Finance? Why do you have a Minister of Finance? This is the weird thing. If Mark Carney's trying to argue that the governor of the bank of the country that they're in, that they are the actual one that manages the economy, then what does Champagne do? What do you do? According to you, based on what you're crediting yourself in the past, all of the work that's managing the economy is actually done by the Bank of Canada, and you're not the governor of that. And you're correspondingly saying the same thing, that the British government, that their finance minister and their government, they don't manage their economy either. You were doing it. Oh, really? I think there's some finance ministers that actually have a job, and previous finance ministers that unfortunately are no longer with us, but some of them that are, they would have something different to say about that. So within the span of a week, Mr. Carney has said he's going to get tough on Trump. He's not going to accept a narrow deal. And less than 48 hours later, he's bending the knee even more than ever before to Donald Trump. And it's specifically on a narrow deal. Some people may come at this commentary and say, well, what do you expect him to do? I expect him to do what he said that he would do. He said he was going to operate a certain way. The point is he is not. He's not doing what he said he would do. Will things change? Well, then he shouldn't have said what he said, right? He shouldn't have made those promises. He should have gotten a deal with Donald Trump last year. So, for anyone that is trying to criticize the criticism of Mark Carney, he is being judged based on what he said. And what he said and what he's doing are not matching. He will never accept a bad deal. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're conceding all of this stuff, not even to eliminate tariffs on 232s, just to reduce them, some would say that's a bad deal. But again, as I said before, what do I know? We just look at this stuff every day. We track what politicians say. We track what their promises are. And our job, our performance, unlike some of the mainstream media, is we actually hold this government to account. And we point out what they've said and when it's a contradiction and when Canadians should understand what the difference is. So, ladies and gentlemen, your Prime Minister, Mr. Mark Carney, a master of saying one thing and doing another, promising the moon, and he can't even get off the launch pad.